I move second reading of Bill 152, an act to enact a Bill of Rights for small business.
Mrs. Munro moves second reading of Bill 152. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for her presentation. The member from York Simcoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of the most hardworking and dedicated people I know are small business owners and their families. When you open a small business, you are entirely responsible for its success and its growth. If you have a store and an employee is sick, you have to be there. If an order is coming in, you need to receive it. If your business has closed for the day, but there is work to be done, you stay to do it. The vitality of small businesses has always impressed me. Starting a small business is not for the faint of heart. It requires enormous energy and self-confidence, as well as significant expertise. You need to be able to plan. You certainly need to work hard, and sometimes you need more than a little bit of luck. I also find it amazing that even though small business owners work harder than almost anyone else, they are still amongst the most active leaders in our communities. Whether it's fundraising for worthy projects, sponsoring the local hockey team, organizing the church supper, or keeping the Chamber of Commerce going, small business people seem to be at the heart of almost every local endeavour. It should be the role of government to encourage this vitality. It's a resource you cannot pay for, but it is just as valuable as our natural resources, education, or infrastructure. Yet too often, the actions of government at every level work to sap this vitality. Small businesses people have to spend more and more time meeting the demands of government regulators and rule makers. Government rules, many of them senseless, cost businesses thousands of dollars a year. And remember, the smaller the business, the more it costs, and the more time it takes to meet regulations. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business gives a good statistical background of the problem. They calculate that regulation in Canada costs businesses of all sizes more than $30 billion per year. What does this mean for individual small businesses? The latest CFIB's Red Tape report found that the annual regulation cost per employee is $5,825 per employee for businesses with fewer than 5 workers. The per employee amount declines for larger businesses, so that by the time a business has more than 100 workers, the per employee cost is $1,117. 2005 data from the CFIB indicate that 55% of all small business owners believe that regulation impedes their ability to compete with larger businesses. And 73% say that regulatory compliance adds significant cost to their lives. We must remember that in most small businesses, it is the owner who must do most of the work to comply. This means business people spend less time with their families and more time servicing government. Shockingly, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business found that 25% of business people would not have gone into business for themselves if they had known the burden of regulation. Now, I'm not saying that we don't need regulation. We just need to minimize regulation and eliminate unnecessary and duplication of rules. The people of Ontario expect that the Ontario government should regulate business only to the extent necessary to protect human life, human health, the natural environment, and the fair treatment of employees, to name a few. While it is necessary for the government to make regulations dealing with business, too often governments pass regulations that harm businesses and damage Ontario's prosperity and economic competitiveness. What we need is a change in attitude. We need government to start thinking of itself as an enabler of opportunity for small business and citizens. This is the motivation I have to introduce a Small Business Bill of Rights for Ontario. If we are to push government to change its attitude towards business, I think we need to make a statement that binds government in its dealing with our small businesses. So let's have a look at some of the rights that I feel are so important. And the first one is the right to operate in a free market system with as little regulation as is possible and necessary. Only businesses can create jobs and prosperity, and government must stay out of the way as much as possible. Whenever government feels the need to make a rule, the first question should be, is this necessary? Is this rule based on a need to protect health and safety, or any of those other important criteria? Is it based on a scientific assessment of risk and need? Are we duplicating some other part of the law? Will this rule make other things worse or make it unaffordable for a business to operate? The right to be served promptly and treated with courtesy and respect by all government officials and inspectors. This right should be a given. When I first started speaking to stakeholders and small businesses about this bill, one of the first things I started to hear was that they supported what I was doing, but please don't use their names because they fear they will be targeted by government inspectors. What a sad situation when the reaction of small businesses to the Ontario government is one of fear. Small businesses should not be treated as criminals waiting to be caught. The third right is to expect the Ontario government and all of its regulatory bodies, inspectors and officials to make the needs of small business a factor in all decisions. It's time to stop writing rules that small businesses cannot reasonably meet and make small business needs a mandatory factor to consider if a rule is to be written. 4, the right to expect that all government inspectors will be competent to properly and fairly enforce rules, and that any fees charged will reflect only the cost of the inspection. I've heard about both of these concerns from small businesses. Many stakeholder groups actually arrange to train their inspectors in the basics of their individual industries. And I think the fee issue is important. Fees should not be used as a tax to fund other activities at regulators. Number 5, the right to be consulted by ministries, municipalities, and all other bodies empowered by the Ontario government to create rules or regulations that could affect small business that are made or amended. This is really mandatory. Too often, rules are written without thought to their ramifications. We found this when rules were published for the propane industry a year after the Sunrise propane explosion. Some small propane dealers faced thousands of dollars in new paperwork costs from government to meet the proposed new rules. All this because government failed to consult. Also because the government failed to base its response to the propane explosion on science and risk assessment. Too many times, the government responds to issues with their priority being to get a good headline or to look like they are making a sympathetic gesture. Small businesses end up paying a heavy price for government getting a good headline. Number 6, the right to operate on a level playing field with larger businesses in seeking government contracts or participating in government boards, consultations, or advisory agents. Government contracts are getting harder and harder to obtain. Many ministries only want to deal with larger suppliers because it's easier for them. We need to simplify contracts and ensure that small vendors can bid without making the process so expensive they cannot participate. Number 7, the right to a simple, fair, and predictable tax system that keeps both tax levels and the cost of preparing and filing tax returns and other required forms to a minimum. The CFIB identified the tax burden as the #1 issue for their members. Number 8, the right to a well-maintained system of education and infrastructure that meets the needs of small business. Another case where small business needs must be taken into account. Number 9, the right to a secure and affordable supply of energy. This is vital. Energy is a huge cost and an unavoidable cost for small business. Costs are rising, and time-of-use pricing doesn't work for many. One of my local pizzeria owners tells me that she would love to use energy late at night, but she has to cook the pizzas when people want to eat them. The right to equal treatment by government, regardless of where in Ontario the business is located. Rural and northern members should know the importance of this. Small business needs in their communities are different and must be acknowledged. I urge all members to support my bill. We need to make a statement that we value small business and that we are prepared to change the attitude of governments at all levels to small business. We all know how hard they work. Let's work together to take some of the burden off their shoulders. We have the power to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Further debate?